Okay, well, everybody's joining. Can we maybe get the slide with the house rules on? Thank you. Okay, I think we should get started. So we'll start with our house rules, the colloquium, house rules and reminders. I'll follow that with the land acknowledgement, and then we'll follow with an introduction, and then Professor Prieto will start her talk. So first, I'll just want to remind everybody there's closed captioning available via real-time human transcription. To enable captions, please click the CC button located at the bottom of the screen. The question period will be conducted using the hand-raising function for those who are online, and raising the literal hand for those who are at the watch party. If you're on Zoom and cannot or do not want to unmute, please use the question and answer function to type in your question. To ask a question, click the raise hand button located at the bottom of the screen, and please wait for your name to be called. When you are called, your name will be promoted. You will be promoted to panelist, and you will be able to unmute yourself. And if you're comfortable with it, please turn on your video. If you have any technical issues, please send it through the chat. Okay, can we go to the next screen? Okay, thank you. So the Department of Linguistics recognizes the University of Michigan's origins in a land grant from the Anishinaabe, including Ottawa, Ojibwe, and Potawatomi, and Wendat. The university continues to exist on the historical territorial land of Anishinaabe people. Odawa, Ojibwe, and Potawatomi are collectively called Anishinaabe and belong to the Algonquian language family. There are currently 12 recognized Anishinaabe tribes in the state of Michigan, and many Anishinaabe people living throughout the state interacting at the University of Michigan. And I would like to welcome Professor Prieto, Professor Pilar Prieto, thank you for joining us at our colloquium, also at 10 p.m. your time. Thank you very much. Professor Prieto is an ICREA research professor, so that is at the Catalan Institute for Research and Advanced Study. She received her PhD in Romance Linguistics at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. She spent some time working at the Bell Laboratories, and since 2008, she has established and been leading the prosodic studies group at the Department of Translation and Language Sciences at the University of Pompeu, Fabra in Barcelona. In the process of establishing one of the most well-known prosodic research centers, she has also advised too many master's theses to count and 20 PhD theses. Her work and the work of her lab focuses on prosodic structure, and it has a very wide breadth and depth of research that has been conducted there. The research examines the role of prosody in communication, and this is, as I mentioned, done from a very wide angle. So she examines prosodic representation, its multimodal expression in both phonetics and co-speech gesture, and also its interface with semantics. So many of us who work on prosody and phonetics wish we would do more semantics. Professor Prieto does it, and the goal is to establish a fully developed theory of prosodic structure and communication. She further focuses also on different populations, so adults, children, second language learners, and also with an eye how prosody and co-speech gesture can help in language acquisition, and how it can also help in training for populations, impaired as well as non-impaired populations. Along the way, she has established a number of really fascinating findings. I will just mention a couple of, starting from her early findings, where she proposed, she's done foundational work in the orthosegmental model of prosodic structure. So one of the crucial findings, for example, that we have, what is now well established, that pitch accents have a double coordination at the segmental level. She was also one of the first researchers to investigate how articulatory phonology can inform prosodic research. She's done foundational research again on prosody and co-speech gesture. So she was first to show how co-speech gesture is affected, how it's coordinated not just with prosodic prominence, but also is affected by prosodic boundaries. More recently, she has been examining prosody in L1 and in L2, the second which we will hear about more today. And she's again examined this from a very wide perspective using naturalistic data and examining, for example, how children's knowledge of imitation, this is just one of the studies that I thought was really interesting, how imitation differs depending on what children imitate and how that informs prosodic theory. Without further ado, Pilar, thank you so much for coming. We're all looking forward to hearing your talk. Thank you.
Yes, thanks, Yelena, for this great presentation. I think it's nice that you went into the actual articles and found all these things. And I was remembering also some of the results. So thanks a lot. And thanks for the nice invitation to the Linguistics Colloquium here. And I think it's a great place. I think you've been like very inspired. Your lab has been an inspiration basically for our lab, and all the work that we have done in the temporal association between gesture and prosody and speech has been, we've really read all your work so much. I'm really happy about this. And also there is this conference on multimodality coming along in Barcelona, and you are coming. So I think that it is going to be very nice, exchange and information about, the work that you are doing and the work that we're doing that has many overlaps. So really thanks a lot. And also thanks for this afternoon. I've been, having really nice chats. And so really thanks so much for welcoming me, even if it's online, and I'm having a very nice experience already. Okay, so I just to start, yes, as Yelena was saying, in our lab we do several, we basically analyze several areas, but today I really wanted to speak about the L2 work because it really shows how the actual integration between gesture and speech can actually boost and bootstrap L2 speech. And I think that we have very nice evidence for this. I would like to share with you and see what you think, and then talk about it. So to start with, let me just show you a video so that we can start a little bit seeing what the main questions are in here. And I'd like to pay attention to ex-President Obama's hand movements and seeing how he associates these gestures with prosody and speech. And let's just talk about it a little bit just after.
I believe we can keep the promise of our founding. The idea that if you're willing to work hard, it doesn't matter who you are or where.
Okay, just a little taste of this. As you've seen, well, let me just turn on, well, just share my PowerPoint, and then we can take it from there. Let's see. Okay. You see it? You
Yes,
see it
we do.
fine?
Yes,
Okay, great. Okay, so we've seen, right? I mean, you guys here know a lot about gesture coordination with speech, and this is a very nice talk to see how his hands really move with prosodic prominence, right? And how his hands, what we call beat gestures, are bounded also by prosodic phrasing. So we're going to use these movements, right, to try to bootstrap speech production, right, at the L2 level. So with the learners that haven't acquired like native pronunciation, to see how it can be boosted, right? So that's okay. So just to start, we know that prosody is a central and structural component of language phonology, and we're going to take advantage of this. And then we know we're going to take advantage of the fact that prosodic and gestural features of language are tightly interconnected from a temporal and a pragmatic perspective. We're going to focus on the temporal perspective. And the goal of the experiments that I'm going to present today, the main underlying goal is to assess the value of using hand movements, mimicking not only rhythm, but also melody for second language pronunciation learning. So I'm going to go through the main goals of the experiments that I'm going to present. So the experiment 1 will focus on whether a short training with producing rhythmic beat gestures in this course can facilitate L2 pronunciation. Then the second experiment will move to kinesthetic movements, but they're not going to be these natural movements, but more like hand clapping. But it's like also a kinesthetic movement that can represent rhythm, right? And then we're going to do 2 experiments here with 2 different populations to see if this can boost novel word learning and targeting pronunciation of this novel word learning. Then experiments 4 and 5, and one of them is very nice, and in that it shows that embodied melodic trainings, like basically that what we do in basically mimicking pitch, can facilitate not only the production of the actual tones or pitch, but also the segmental level, right? So in this case, French rounded vowels. We'll see very nice results on this. And then finally, I'd like to move to a little bit forward and see whether just musical trainings involving rhythmic and melodic, rhythm and melody, involving rhythm and melody, can basically boost also L2 pronunciation. And these are embodied musical trainings. So the idea is that these different types of embodied prosodic trainings, they are basically prosody based, help boost the acquisition of not only suprasegmental features, but also segmental features. Okay, so this, of course, is part of this great team. You have Florence and Peng here. You'll see that a lot of work is by them. They are now postdoctoral fellows. Also Olga, she's also a postdoc, and Yuan she's going basically to pre-deposit her thesis on Monday, and musical and the clapping study that we're going to see is basically carried out by her. And then we have our external collaborators also here. So I'm very grateful to all of them. We have had very nice meetings to prepare all this. I'm really glad to be able to present it. Okay, so as we were saying, right, and as we saw, as you guys know, gestures are really integrated with speech in time and semantic function. And these are the so-called phonological synchrony rules and the semantic and pragmatic synchrony rules by McNeill, who established them in 1992, and they are still, clearly there, right? So, as you guys know, right, the gestures are anchored to prosodic structure, right? And that's over and over, you can see how, across languages, many different studies show that the most prominent part of gestures, that is the strokes and affixes, tend to occur with the most prominent parts of a speech, in this case, the speech prominence, right? Prosodic prominence. And then also, as you know, because you've been doing a lot of work on this in your department, right? That we know that the timing of gestures is also constrained by prosodic phrasing. And here I always like to show this example. Yelena was referring to this study before, right? And this is a study that we carried out with Nuria some years ago, so Nuria Esteve-Gibert. And there, with a pointing corrective focus task, we could see how the timing, the alignment of the actual peak, right, of the of the rising pitch accent. This was basically, like the contrastive focus realization was really aligned with the peak, with the pitch peak, the apex of the pointing gesture, right? I mean, this was one of our findings. And, clearly what happened was that, apart from this, as the peak was moving backwards, that is with an upcoming phrase boundary, what was happening was that exactly in the same way, the apex of the gesture was also retracting. So they were retracting in the same way, right? I mean, so the idea was that, okay, I mean, prominence is attracting gesture, but also prosodic phrasing is constraining this timing realization, right? And this was also related to, some of the findings of Yelena's lab, right? So that was very nice to see how really prosodic structure was there to really predict gesture timing, right? So we can see the same idea with beat gestures, right? You see how, the stroke of the beat gesture, which is in the center of this image, is really aligned in this case with the rising pitch accent, right? And that's what also probably 70% of what we heard with Obama's speech was about this, right? Like about having the stroke aligned with the pitch accented syllables, and in many cases were rising pitch accents. So we can see these B gestures as highlighters of prosodic structure, right? Both of prominent parts and also phrase parts. So this double structure. So since B gestures, in this case, these natural B gestures highlight this double structure, right, about prominence and phrasing, can we use it to highlight, can we use this highlighting function of gesture to improve second language pronunciation? And that's what we're going to do in the first study, and then continue with also in other types of embodiment, which are not natural gestures in this case, right? Okay, so we know from previous evidence, right, that the rhythmic priming and also prosodic trainings are beneficial for phonological processing, phonological production, reading skills, right? I mean, this research has basically focused on prosodic trainings, has not had like embodiment involved, right? So we wanted to go a step further and see, okay, what if you add this embodiment part to these trainings, right? What do we gain? So in this case, we know little about the effects of embodied prosodic trainings in boosting the second language pronunciation learning, right? And since prosodic structure is so important for organizing language temporally, we, through these embodied prosodic trainings, we really try to boost this structure and then facilitate actual production, even segmental production in a second language. Okay, so these basically, is couched, all these experiments are basically couched in the embodied cognition paradigm and also in the music embodied cognition paradigm. Has also been applied to musical education. And here we basically think that sensory and motor information, if you provide these to learners or even to just cognitive processing, right? This allows for a richer and conceptual representation, right? And the idea is that body representations are strongly connected to cognitive representations and to speech representations in this case, right? So that's what we're trying to show. So we want to apply in this case, right, the effects of embodiment on learning and apply them specifically to phonological learning and see these transfers between movements, right, and speech, right, and movements related to prosodic concepts, right? Okay, so we can review quickly the small amount of literature because it's not very it's not very big, but we have some studies on the use of what we call visual spatial gestures that really highlight some specific phonetic features, like in this case, for example, articulatory features or segmental features, right? In this case, it's like the explosion of a plosive, right? Also, we have like the so-called durational gestures that represent timing, right? Or pitch gestures that represent like specific tones or in like nuclear pitch accents, right? Or even beat gestures, right? In general, if you take these studies as a whole, we see that they focused a lot on perception, on the assessment of how do you gain on perception, for example, of the Chinese tones by using beat gestures, right? And we see that they're not always positive results. Right now, Florence is undertaking a systematic review on these results, and it looks like we have more positive results, if you put things together, and mostly on production, right? But here, what we want to do is not so much work at the, at the local level, but like we saw that perhaps 70% of the work has been done works at the local level, syllabic level, or the segmental level. We want to work more at the phrase level, at the prosodic level, right? So that's what we were aiming at doing. We're working on highlighting this prosodic structure through, basically through body movement, right? So as I said, right, with all these studies, we hypothesized that these embodied trainings highlighting phrase level prosodic structure will act as scaffolding mechanisms, right, for the acquisition of L2 pronunciation. And we're going to see some nice results with these. So let's start with beat gestures. Beat gestures, right, apart from marking rhythm, right, we know that they also mark focus, information structure, discourse structure, right? So in a way, they can also be used to bootstrap, for example, narrative learning or discourse learning in children, right? And we have some nice results on these if you want to check them out. But today we're going to focus more on the rhythmic part and the phonological part. So we know that these beat gestures can help boost recall of information, discourse comprehension, prosodic fluency, for example, and also even narrative learning, right? But we want to now focus more on the phonological function. So thus training with these beat gestures can also help on L2 pronunciation learning. So let's look at the results here, right? Let's look at a little bit how it was organized, this first study. The idea, we have another study on basically observing beat gestures. This one is in producing beat gestures, but we also have nice results on observing beat gestures. This is work published in Language Teaching Research if you want to check it out. So here we want to have Catalan learners of English in a way, because as you know, right, they belong to different classes, rhythmic classes. So English belongs to more like a stress time language with the stress syllables much longer and more prominent than the unstressed syllables. And Catalan pairs with Spanish in being a syllable time language. And then you have a more isochronous syllabic duration, even across stressed and non-stressed syllables. Also, from a more higher level perspective, the two languages have a big difference on how they realize phrasal prominence. So we wanted to really work with these two languages, and also we have many Catalan learners of English in Barcelona. So we used, these. So the hypothesis was whether a short training encouraging Catalan learners of English to produce beat gestures in this course would have a positive effect on their L2 pronunciation after training. So that was, I mean, the procedure, we always use the same, which is basically some pre-test tasks before training, some post-test tasks, and then we normally have like between subjects organization. So a group of learners do some specific training and the other learners do the other training. In this case, we basically had a task which was basically like a discourse completion task, which was quite natural for, based on normal context that you can find in, in a second language classroom, for example, right? And then we had this discourse completion task also at post-test. And in the meantime, you had like a beat gesture observation group and a beat gesture production group. Okay, so that's a typical example from these prompts. So like, for example, you are in a lecture at the university, you didn't hear what the professor just said, and would like to ask your friend to repeat it for you. And then we basically say, so what would you say in this context? And then you say, now please record your response. So that was what they were doing at pre-test and what they would repeat at post-test to see their gains, right? And then basically for these, we had a very simple analysis of these. This is quite common, something that you do quite commonly in L2 speech research, which is basically have an assessment by native speakers. In this case, we're 5 native speakers, basically rating accentedness, at pre and post test in a, in a random fashion, right? Basically, the raters didn't know where they were listening to the pre or post test version of that specific speaker, right? So that's what they, they heard, right? That was pre and post test. Let's look at the training. Okay, so some people, they basically listen to the native speaker reacting to these prompts, right? And we had a gesture observation group and then a gesture production group, right? You see how they gesture after the instructor. And this is what they would listen to. Let's hear an example.
Sorry, what did the professor just say? I couldn't hear him.
Okay, so half of the students, basically, this gesture observation group just, observed and repeated the speech, and the others were basically repeating the speech and producing gesture. And they were trained for basically 15 minutes on several prompts, and then basically went on again to the discourse completion task and completed it after training. So that's the results on accentedness at pre-post test. And we had also a delayed post test. Oh no, sorry, we didn't have a delayed post test, sorry. These are unrelated items on the right. You see how from pre-test to post-test, you have that, basically you have what we expected, which was a reduction in accentedness of basically half a point or even 1 point in one case, right? For the beat production group, you basically have more gains than in the beat observation group, right? So that's in a way, like what we wanted to show was that the involvement of the body was helping you to actually have a better pronunciation at post-test, right? So that's, and the unrelated items at pre and post-test are not affected, right? As you can see these. Yeah, okay. So this is what we were actually looking for, right? So the conclusions for the short training were that basically if you encourage learners to produce beat gestures in this course, this can improve pronunciation more than just seeing these beat gestures. We have the other study in which we compare beat gestures to no gesture, and we also get an improvement from just observing gestures. Okay, so that was the first study. Now, continuing with rhythm, right? Our idea, our question here was whether rhythmic trainings, but in this case, using hand clapping, that is a body percussion movement or kinesthetic movement, right, can benefit L2 pronunciation, right? And this is something that, well, hand clapping basically highlights rhythm, right, as well as syllabic and prosodic structure. And we know that it is an easily adaptable game that you can do for children and young adults too. And we know that it triggers positive emotions. So it was nice to think about whether we could also bootstrap rhythm through hand clapping, right? So this embodied activity. So studies 2 and 3 here are basically have the same design, but apply to different populations. One of them is basically Catalan children in the case of the first study, and the other is basically Chinese adolescents. And they were, in this case, they were learning French, new French words. It's basically, they haven't heard French before. Neither of these two populations, they were not in contact with French. Okay, so the general question is that whether a rhythmic activity can help Catalan children and Chinese teenagers to improve their pronunciation of newly learned words in French. And yeah, I mean, what do we want to improve in here, right? We know that in French, first, primary stress is located always, it's word final, right? And this is different from Catalan and Chinese, right? Completely different typologically. And also it is realized by extra lengthening. And I wanted to show you just this so that you can hear the difference, right? So you can see confiture, right? Spoken by a native French speaker. You see how long the tur is at the end, right? And you can hear it.
Confiture.
Confiture, right? You can see how this is. I cannot see right now how many milliseconds, but you can see that is definitely twice as long as the preceding syllable, at least, right? Then we can listen to the Chinese speakers repeating these confiture, and then you see almost like a glottal stop appearing, like almost after the start of the vowel. So
confiture,
okay,
confiture,
right? So basically this is what tends to happen with Chinese speakers and also with Catalan speakers, that they basically apart from the location of stress, they really shorten the production of stress here. So I wanted to improve on these, right? And not specifically these, and in general pronunciation, but that was our target, because by clapping you could basically strengthen this perception of final prominence, right? Okay, so these two experiments are with naive learners, and this is a word learning task with hand clapping. Experiment 2 with Catalan children had 30 children from 7 to 8 from a primary school in Girona, and they had Catalan as first language. Importantly, here we chose cognate target words. So confiture in Catalan is confitura, right? So they basically understood immediately what they were learning, but of course, phonologically, things were very different, right? By contrast, for Chinese, they were all non-cognate words. No one, we basically didn't choose any English word that it could be some cognate that could sound familiar to them, right? So in this case, there were 50 adolescents from a middle school in China, and they had Chinese as a first language, but none of them had learned French before. These are the target words. We have bisyllables, trisyllables, more than 3 syllables. And the difference was that there were cognates for Catalan children, non-cognates for Chinese adolescents, and presumably this creates, learning non-cognates has this, added difficulty in the learning task, right? Okay, so this is the procedure, right? It's the same in both groups. We have the clapping group, the no clapping group, have a pre-test with an elicited repetition task of these 20 French words that they didn't know. Then you have the training, and then the post-test again with the same words, right? But this was, and then we also had a recall task, but I don't know if we're going to show that today. Let's see basically how was the training in both groups. So for the clapping condition, this is what they saw for the training, and then you just have to imagine that for the non-clapping condition, it's exactly the same, but without clapping, right? Okay, so let's see this one.
Pizza. Pizza.
Then they were instructed to basically repeat and clap their hands.
Éléphant. Éléphant.
Okay, so this is what they heard, right? And this is what they were doing, right, in the clapping condition. So in this, we're going to hear the target French word mandarin, purée, and ordinateur. Okay.
Mandarin.
Purée.
Ordinateur.
Okay. So that's the clapping group. The non-clapping group was just repeating speech with no clapping, right? So the results on accentedness. Let's see the Catalan children. You can see how, the no clapping group started with an accentedness. There was, basically what we find is that the clapping group had a significant difference between pre and post test that the no clapping group didn't have, right? So that's, what we find just assessing the accentedness ratings before and after training. What happened in experiments 3 studies, what there is with the Chinese, basically with Chinese students, we see that here there is no interaction. Basically, I don't think that the arrow needs to be eliminated. So that's basically the gains, even though there was a tendency, the accentedness ratings by a native speaker couldn't notice the difference in the clapping group versus the non-clapping group, right? So what we did was to further analyze acoustically what happened in the word final syllable to see if they could lengthen more, but it was a lengthening that it was not actually noticed by native speakers, right? So the acoustic results, looking at syllable final duration, basically you see the expected results here. In the no clapping group, basically you see the same duration of the target syllable at pre and post test, and in the clapping group you see an increase, right, of probably 100 milliseconds in the between pre and post test, right? And, it's nice to see how in the Chinese group, exactly the same tendency happens. You see how they were actually, after training, they clearly got the idea that the final syllable was more prominent, and they were actually implementing these durationally, right? So in the end, we can see that acoustic results really show that the clapping group was working in both experiments, right? Even though it was more subtle for the Chinese group, right? So what we think, right, with these rhythmic embodied trainings, either with beat gestures and hand clapping, is that they help L2 pronunciation because they're highlighting rhythmic structure in speech through the body, right? And we also think that, by implementing even short embodied rhythmic trainings, you seem to have, an effective support for L2 pronunciation, right? And you can see that, the clapping experiment was basically a novice learner. So that's why we say that this can work at different levels of proficiency, right? Because the first experiment was more for intermediate level speakers, and this clapping experiment was more for initial, basically novice learners of French, right? So this is for rhythm. So let's look at melody a little bit. So, we have two nice experiments that I like to show you on the effects of melodic-based training. So basically hand movements that mimic basically intonation. And we want to ask in this case whether these trainings, and we will ask these in one specific experiment, have a positive effect on the learning of segmental features that are also, not in the native language, right? So these are experiments 4 and 5. And here we see how in one case, we basically look at embodied prosodic trainings, but looking at logatoms, and we will see what logatoms are. And the other one is similar, but focusing on the segmental, on the segmental issue. But we'll see that they are, quite similar also, but I would like to present them together. So if we revise the literature a little bit, there's a lot of work done more on L2 tone, right? I mean, on the local hand movements, basically looking at how, if you highlight these tonal movements in the syllable, then you can get better, gains of perception, basically, and have some on production, but basically the work is focused on perception. And then the work on L2 intonation has focused on nuclear stress, not so much on the whole melody of the phrase, right? So to our knowledge, it's basically the first studies looking at these. So we want to look at the effects of embodying phrase level rhythm and intonation, but basically through pitch movements. This is something like what we call like prosodic hand gesture. Yeah, and we're going to learn French here too. Okay, so these are two training experiments mimicking discourse. The experiment 4, as I was saying, wants to assess the effect of embodied logatoms, and logatoms are a series of syllables like ta, 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 ta. I mean, they have been claimed by several authors to be like, like serve as highlighters of prosodic structure, because you don't have the segmental, part to worry about, right? So you read da 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 da, right? So we wanted to also see how this was working for and actually test it empirically, right? And then the other experiment was to assess the effects of embodied L2 speech, but in this case, melodic movements, right? And looking at the segmentals. So now we incorporate like longer trainings, because really we went into the classroom to do this, because we really wanted to move from the lab in a way to the classroom, and we're trying to do this. And also we, as I was saying, we look not only at suprasegmental, but also at segmental accuracy. And we work with real learners here, right? Okay, so this is a dialogue-based training procedure. So basically they see like an interaction in French. These are intermediate learners of French, they're Catalan speakers, and they see something like this. So they work first on these interactions, the beginning of the class.
Hey, salut Lucie. Salut Muriel, mais chut, ne parle pas si fort. Tu es folle. Où vas-tu? Faire un tour dans la rue.
Okay, well, I mean, this is, you have several, procedures here. You see the conversation, then you start, the work of semantically interpreting everything, and then reading it aloud. And then, it comes a moment where we implement the actual phonetic training, right? And in experiment 4, we have like, these 75 students that we have are separated into 2 groups. well, basically 2 classrooms, so 35 and 35. And then they basically are either in the non-embodied group or in the embodied group. In experiment 4, we have like embodied logatoms like this one. So they basically repeat the sentences of the conversation with logatoms, and in this case, embodied logatoms.
Da 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 da.
Okay, so they know the target sentence.
Mais le facteur n'est pas rentré de sa tournée.
Okay, so they always keep like the target sentence before and after, right? So that they can interpret the da 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 da, right? But it's basically working with logatoms. And then, well, the non-embodied logatom, you can imagine, right, is basically the da 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 without the hand movements. And in the embodied speech here, and this is what you
Juste un peu mal au cœur.
Okay, and the one without the embodied.
Juste un peu mal au cœur.
Okay, so they basically work on basically phonetically training all the sentences or most of the sentences in the conversation. So the experimental procedure for basically the 2 experiments were like 30 minutes discourse-based training sessions, right, in different weeks, and then a pre-test and a post-test. In this case, you see that the pre-test and post-test is more complicated than what we had before, right? So it's dialogue reading, sentence imitation, and also we have a delayed post-test in experiment 5. Importantly, in experiment 5, we also have we look at the vowels that are most difficult for Catalan speakers, and these are front-rounded vowels, and U, right? And then we actually designed all these courses so that they would contain lots of rounded vowels, right? Okay, so which pronunciation measures we take? Now we'll see that it's more complete than just accentedness. In here we have like global proficiency measures that are assessed by native raters, and then they rate accent for the reading task, for example, they rate accentedness, comprehensibility, fluency, segmental accuracy, and suprasegmental accuracy, right? And in experiment 5, we have also global proficiency measures, accentedness, comprehensibility, and fluency, but also we add these acoustic measures of front rounded vowels, U, and right? And then with this way, we want to see whether, this prosodic training, embodied prosodic training is really, triggering gains, right? Okay, so let's see. These are a little bit long, but I think it's worth it to really see the results. So let's see the results of the first experiment. You see how the embodied logatoms at the right part, right? You see that basically is the, between pre and post test, it is basically the condition that triggers the most, learning between pre and post test in accentedness, right? And that's what you get. And this is a contrast with non-embodied logatoms or with speech only, right? When you look at suprasegmental features, is the same. So the most of the gain and is obtained in the embodied logatoms condition, right? And this basically is what you get from the models, right? Okay, so for experiment 5, also for global pronunciation measures here, apart from pre-test and post-test, you have also delayed post-test, which is the one that was done, the test that was done after, I think it was 2 weeks. Okay, and you see how the no gesture group at the left or the gesture group at the right, is different because it has, definitely a better gain, right? And that's what you see in here. Okay. Also for sentence imitation and accentedness, you see how the gain in the actual gesture group is really stronger than in the no gesture group, right? That's what we get. Let's look now at the analysis of front-rounded vowels. And here, what we really want to see is an increase, right? Because what generally Catalan learners do is that they transform the U, E, many cases into the back U, O, O, right? So what we want to see basically is an increase in F2. And that's what we're looking for in our acoustic analysis of this, gain, right? So we want to see more fronted vowels and higher F2 values. What do we find? In the sentence imitation task, the acoustic analysis of front rounded vowels, you see again the embodied group basically fronting more the vowel U, right? And actually no change was happening in the non-embodied group. Same thing for the vowel E, right? They were actually attaining more, they were more target-like in the embodied group, and the non-embodied group was not. And then it was, very nice how the delayed post-test was maintaining the post-test results. And this is what we highlighted also in the publication, right? Because I think that this is one of the nicest results, right? And the same thing for vowel right? Which stays the same for non-embodied, and for embodied, basically you see how you basically get more front, and also delayed post-test, you stay with these learning, right? Okay, the dialogue reading task is the same thing, vowel U, you see here. And actually now this is nice because in the dialogue reading task, basically you are, you don't have a way to imitate, right? So you're basically producing speech in a very fast way, right? So that is nice that the results are also here, and the same with vowel right? You get also a gain, a more fronting, from pre to post test, and this maintains also at delayed post test. Okay, so the summary of this, it's a bit long to compare these two experiments, but as global pronunciation measures, both studies show a significant improvement in accentedness in the embodied cognitions, in the embodied conditions, in both dialogue and sentence imitation tasks. So that's nice, because it's probably the accentedness is the most fine measure, because that's where native raters really try to find some non-native pronunciation, right? And no effects on comprehensibility and fluency. Comprehensibility is more like a raw measure. Do I understand you? I can be very lax here, right? Then for suprasegmental and segmental accuracy, experiment 4 showed the beneficial effects of embodied prosodic training on suprasegmental accuracy, not on segmental accuracy. But then in experiment 5, by doing the acoustic analysis, you see how the embodied training was triggering higher F2 values of the front rounded vowels systematically, and also it was maintaining the training effects at delayed post-test. Okay, so now we've seen how these rhythmic movements can trigger more accurate speech production, right? And also these melodic trainings, right, at the phrase level. Now we want to go a step further, and let me just try to finish, in 4 minutes, so that in this way we can keep the time, right? The idea is whether we can go a step further and obtain direct transfer effects from just music training. Music training, we know that music training that is embodied, like a Dalcross-based music training, basically what it does is to highlight the rhythmic and melodic patterns of music, right? So we want to expose, Chinese learners of English to do these pure music trainings and see whether when they go back to the classroom, to the English classroom, they do better, right, in pronunciation. It's just 3 sessions, so we were saying, well, let's see what happens. We're not so sure about this, right? So we presented this work, and now we are going to basically submit it for publication. So, and we're very excited about these results. So we'll 3-session Dalcross-based musical training involving embodied musical activities, and that these were 3 sessions of half an hour each, or 40 minutes. Can they enhance foreign language pronunciation skills? And we also have an imitation, a general imitation task with 6 languages. That will show us, will, so, try to see whether we have these effects, right? So let's see what a Dalcroze-based musical training works. That's basically listening to the music and moving to look for specific. Here, we're finding the beat, right? We have to touch the balloon every time you perceive the beat. Okay. One thing, then we have more complicated things. These are things that we included also in our training. Okay, so that's a little bit like hand clapping, but getting more complicated, right? So they had a lot of fun, and actually, with the satisfaction questionnaire, one group was much better than the other. So they had more fun in the embodied music group. The non-embodied music group what they were doing was going to regular music classes. So that's like a control group, is like a treatment as usual thing, right? So what did we do at pre and post test? We had a multi-language imitation task before training and after training was the same, which was rated by 2 native speakers of each language, Catalan, German, Turkish, Hebrew. Some sentences were hard to really repeat. And then just a sentence reading task with 3 short English sentences. And that was a pre and post test. Okay, so results of the multi-language imitation task, you can see how, pre-test and post-test for the embodied music group at the left, right? And the non-embodied music group at the right. And you can see how, they improved, right? Almost like 1 point, which is a lot in the language imitation task, right? And basically this was the embodied music group that was getting better at the imitation of production of non-native languages, right? And then the results on the sentence reading task, also we have several measures here. They were better in the embodied music group for accentedness, but also for comprehensibility, also for segmental accuracy, because we wanted to see whether it was more on a suprasegmental accuracy or segmental accuracy, and they look the same. So it looks again, right, that it's not only about suprasegments that you are learning, right? And then also fluency, right? So in all of our measures, it was basically the embodied music group that was getting more attuned to the actual prosodic and phonological structure of the language, right? Okay, so summarizing, because I think we're getting to the end, right? Basically, we got very nice results on a speech imitation accuracy, which was assessed only by accentedness in the music embodied group, and the same thing for all measures for the sentence reading task. This was with 3 sessions, like very, active sessions of Dalcroze-based music training. So it's nice to see this transfer effect, right, between actual music training and phonological speech production, right, and phonetic speech production after all. Okay, so the final conclusions here, right, I hope to have shown some nice, convincing results on how embodied prosodic trainings can be so powerful, and also even just purely embodied music trainings, right? And that we've seen that they tend to act as scaffolding mechanisms for L2 speech production, right? And they support both suprasegmental and segmental features, because from one end you could see, okay, that it makes sense, right, that you are transferring suprasegmental features, but in this case, we from several results, you tend to see that you have this scaffolding effect, right, for segmental features. So why does it work, right? I've added these ideas that we have, for why this is working so well, right? I mean, and you actually in your groups here, you've been working on this and you know quite a lot, right? That probably it is because we have this strong coupling between speech and also manual and arm motor actions, right? That start really from early development. And it might well be that the success of these embodied trainings is evidence for this strong connection, right? Also, I mean, we're working at the level of prosodic structure. So it is a very salient temporal organizer of language, right? Of phonetically. So it's not only organization at the level of the duration, but also like phonetic organization, right? So that's why we think that it's also helping bootstrap the production of segmental features. And yeah, I want to add this powerful idea of music training, in the sense that you can train students to a variety of rhythmic and melodic structures, and this actually prompts like prosodic flexibility, and then you end up with a better learning outcome, right? So that's quite powerful also. Okay, so just to end, I'd like to say that it's not only discourse natural beat gestures that help, but also prosodic oriented gestures, body movement, right? And we've seen that they support phonological learning, and it would be nice if we'd start integrating more multimodality in general into not only L2 communicative interaction, but also L1 learning. So, I mean, we've also gone into primary schools and preschools. Right now, we have a very nice 1 month multimodal narrative intervention with a lot of multimodality, but in this case, it's basic and natural multimodality. And we've seen with 65 children already that we have very positive effects on narrative production, phonological skills, and also actual use of the non-dominant language, because this is a bilingual school with, a training in the non-dominant language, right? So these are, results that I wanted to share, because we're also, training teachers to implement this narrative intervention, and we're very excited about this. Okay, so thanks a lot for listening, for welcoming me, and I really look forward to your, comments and, anything that you want to say. So thanks a lot.
Thank you, Pilar. This was fascinating. This is really absolutely fascinating. And I see language teaching could be much more interesting than it was when I was studying English. But this is me opening the question and Q&A session. So Sophie will take over. So we have two groups. We have a group online. Please raise your hands there. And also we have the group at the watch party. So Sophie.
Yeah, so we are taking questions now. We can start with the in-person audience if anybody here has a question. And while we're waiting for them, anybody else that's on Zoom can feel free to put it in the chat or in the Q&A. There's a Q&A section dedicated to that.
I don't think the Q&A is enabled. At least I've been trying to post a question there.
I see some input, but not questions I can see.
Well, okay, so in the meantime, people can put questions in the chat. If you have questions to ask in the chat. Yeah, I don't see anybody
Okay, I have a question. I'll just start while we are waiting.
Thanks, Jelena.
So I also can't put on my video, but okay. So this is great. I can't wrap my head around the fact that vowels are going to improve through the melodic task, the logatoms. I just and you mentioned coupling, but can you say something more about it? I just cannot wrap my head around that.
Well, yeah, thanks for the nice question. This is actually our basic, point, the most important point of discussion in the paper, right? Because we really wanted to try to explain these, right, or understand it, right? And it was our hypothesis that this would work actually, because we really think that I was saying as this with prosody, right? I mean, like highlighting the prosodic part, the rhythmic and melodic, but basically in this case the melodic part, but it includes rhythm too, right? It was actually bootstrapping the whole phonetic package, and this is what we try to say, right? That it's through highlighting this important, organizational structure, you get gains below that, right? So it's not. So the question is, when you want to teach someone, the phonetics of an L2, right? It's better that you start high up than low down, right? Actually, when we teach, when we're teaching L1, right? I mean, we speak with exaggerated speech, like basically highlighting prosody too, right? A lot, also with our hands. This actually, we do something like this naturally, I think. And yeah, I mean, so, and we speak with sentences. Sometimes we highlight specific words, right? Because we're interested on segmentation also and word learning. But we do this also to bootstrap, right, phonology. Mm-hmm. So it makes, I think and we know, I guess, that it makes a lot of sense, and that's what teachers do, right?
Yeah.
Now, yeah, I mean, that we explain it in there as the prosodic bootstrapping idea, mm-hmm. Right?
Yeah. No. That
I don't know if, yeah, the coupling between the right. I mean, what all this evidence that you have seen about hand movements, right, and actual, speech, right, the speech interactions. I don't know how much it plays in there, like to explain this. Yeah, right, and the fact that you highlight prosody and you obtain.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. Perhaps you can say something about it, but we didn't mention this in this case. It was more like the prosodic bootstrapping idea.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Highlighting, yeah, yes, no. It makes a lot of sense. There are some comments also in the chat. Cynthia, you want to ask a question? Mm-hmm. This really makes a lot of sense. Okay, I'll just mention Cynthia's question. Could it also be that with embodied training, you could be highlighting the structure that's relevant? Also, you make the training materials a bit more engaging, so the learners pay closer attention, right? That would follow what you were saying as well.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's something that you cannot help here, right? Which is that normally, right? I mean, with adding, right, this extra layer, right?
Yes.
I mean, you can also get more attention, more pleasure, right?
Yes, right,
so
right.
This is, yeah, this is something that we've thought about many times, right? But it's something that how can you basically control for these, right? I mean, it's because we like to work on, natural conditions, basically, right? So, right. And actually, yeah, I mean, if you think about it in the lab experiment where because this has been done in the lab, like compare, for example, right? I mean, this is a lot of embodied cognition stuff, but yeah, I mean, it really has been shown that body involvement, right? Or seeing someone moving is not the same as seeing a light moving. So it's not, right, for specific tasks, it's clear that the engaging of our cognitive system and everything is completely different, right? So we take these kind of, okay, I mean, these can be tried to be, controlled in the lab, etc. But we really want to go more for the application part, right? And we know that in some cases, right? I mean, that we have our restrictions, right? Yeah.
Yes, of
we
course.
prefer to work in this way, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, no, but yes, I think that this you really answered the question how it should how it works.
Yeah.
I see. Okay, there are questions. Sophie, do you?
Yeah. So Mackenzie is able to promote someone to panelists so that they can unmute and ask their question. So is that Cynthia can ask? I believe she has more questions, so she can unmute.
Thank you. I don't think I can start my video, so I'll just stay unseen.
Yeah, sorry, we can't. You have to be a host for some reason.
Yeah, that's okay. Well, thank you, Pilar, for the great talk. It's really interesting. I was just like curious about if different target languages have, different prosodic structures, if like one mode of embodied training would be more efficient for one language than the other. That's like when I got a little bit confused with the vowel training results, although it was like the visual prosody training, but then the speakers also improved in their vowel quality production. So
yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, we were just talking about these, right? I mean, our idea was that prosody would act like a bootstrapper of actually phonetic. So it's like everything is integrated, right? So if you get the prosodic part, it will be easier to integrate also the segmental part. So we know that there's so much integrated that from a learning perspective, it really makes sense to start high, right, with the structure, with the prosodic structure, and then it will help you get your your target segmental goals inside this, right? So that's what we have shown, and there are some experiments here and there showing these. So that's quite nice and powerful also when you think about it, right? Yeah.
Right.
And yeah, and about your second question about the different typologies of prosodic structure, right? I mean, here what we do is we basically choose our second language depending on something that we want to look at. In many cases, like for example, for French was syllable final lengthening, right? So see if in some cases we can do acoustic analysis of these, right? So I guess that in general, right? I mean, learning a second language, right? It can be closer or more distant, right? But anyway, I mean, a training, like for example, a musical training in different melodies and rhythms can help you, right? Anyway, right? To do like even fine-grained differences across language, languages that are within the same language family or more distant languages, right? But yeah, I mean, it might be that you can, right, even just tailor your prosodic embodied training depending on the actual target, right? Like, for example, in Korean, right, we want to emphasize, right, the phrase final, phrase beginning or phrase final, right, or the fact that you have different melodic movements, right, at certain positions that you can actually want to trigger these, you can probably do these too, right? So yeah, but we haven't thought about this yet, right? I mean, that's probably something that that you can do once once we have established like one embodied program, we're actually working a lot on English because there's it's a lot of need probably, and also on Catalan because of because of these bilingual populations and kids, and yeah. So I don't know if I really, got what you wanted to. Yeah.
Your answer was really helpful. Thank you, Pilar. I was just curious if you have the data, because you have the clapping training and also just doing naturally occurring co-speech gestures as well. Do you see like any difference in how effective these training is, like for a language or just across the participants?
Yeah. You mean that like the most successful in a way?
Right.
Yeah, I mean, they are different, right? But I think that the classroom experiments, right, that the ones that with the melodic movements, if they were longer, right? I mean, it's made a difference, right? So I think that it was nice to see how consistent they were, and also they had the delayed post-test effect, right? So I think that clearly, I mean, it would be ideal if these training studies could be done with more, right, with more participants, with longer trainings, with delayed post-test, right, to really see the, right? And we're getting more and more to this, and that's why probably the longer trainings work better. And we were very, very pleased with the music training experiment too, right? So yeah. Yeah, and yeah, we're probably trying to implement more like communicative based trainings too, like narrative based training for L2, including all these. So yeah, it's a challenge to how to incorporate all these right into the classroom. So yeah, but
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Cynthia.
Promise, if you have your question, I know you said that you were formulating it as well, so you don't need to ask a question. But if you have a question, you have the ability to unmute now.
I think I did. I have no video. Okay, my video is not on. Good. Because I didn't want it on. I didn't have a video button, so I wasn't sure what would happen. I don't know. I might just be asking Pilar to repeat herself. I think I was thinking about the same question, but in a slightly different way about how prosodic training and body prosodic training is managing to lead to gains at the segmental level also. And I was wondering if it might have something to do with the sequential presentation of tones and the ability to like make pairwise compare. Like, I'm trying to understand the mechanisms. Like, could it have to do with the sequential presentation of the tones and the ability to make pairwise comparisons amongst them that's like leading to increased sensitivity to the segments themselves? Or I don't know, you may have already answered that, but
well, for the question, yeah, I mean, we made the two groups exactly, do the same tasks, right? I mean, so they were exposed to the same materials. You've seen, how the discourses were constructed, so where they were doing many activities with them. And one of them was to basically repeat the target sentences with or without gestures, right? Or seeing the gestures and not seeing the gestures. So that was the only difference in the materials, basically. And, we match them, we normally match the group for proficiency. So of course they knew about, and I mean, they have heard many times the front-rounded vowels, but if you've seen a pre-test, they were not very good at producing them. And they got better, right? With just the same materials as the no gesture group. So I don't think this can be, explained by the actual, sequential, procedure in the actual training, right? Because it was the same, across the two groups. So that's why we really think that the main difference experimentally is that the fact that one of the groups had the actual gesture, right? Actually, we were also wondering, well, the prominence part, right? I mean, that many cases, the target rounded vowels were in stress position, but also in unstressed position. So it's not that, but it's true that, of course, when you have the movement and it's towards the end, right? I mean, you also stress, you do like a beat gesture, right? So it's like that's why the rhythmic information in the gesture is also there, right? Like stressing prominence. But I mean, they could hear prominence too, right? In the other group. So yeah, I don't think it's due to actual procedure, right? I don't know what you think, but it's a pity that I don't see you guys. All these video things, like.
I'm wondering, I guess, if they could be related to each other.
Related in which sense?
Oops, I keep muting and unmuting myself. The fact, I mean, you're presenting like the whole contour, and that's bootstrapping phonetic acquisition. And I guess what I'm wondering is if like the embodied aspect and like the sort of whole to part relationship could be related to each other in terms of increasing people's sensitivity to that acoustic variability.
Can you elaborate a little bit more? I did not.
I'm not sure actually if I can. It's sort of a nascent thought. I think you gave me something to think about.
Yeah, if you guys have more ideas.
Thank you. That's really interesting.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot.
Maybe we'll move on to, it looks like we have Helen has been waiting to ask a question, and then Acrizio and Yelena also have some questions, but we'll try and get to at least one more person.
Thank you. We have, in teaching French for many years, we've been using the clapping for accentedness and the hand gestures for intonation, but I've never seen a study that showed the effectiveness of that. So I thought that was very interesting. But I'm also very puzzled about how the embodiment helps with the front rounded vowels in French. I'm assuming, well, let me ask the question. You are, before the students know how to have learned how to pronounce the sounds in isolation, is that correct? First?
Well, I mean, they are intermediate level students, so we assume that at some point, right, they have been, taught about, right, I mean, the target vowels, even though, I mean, I have to say that there is no, I mean, I know that in France, you have a lot of, like they have the verbotonal system. We actually work with people on the verbotonal system, right? And there's a lot of tradition to do like phonetic, phonetic training, not in Catalonia, not in Barcelona. So, we are sure that they haven't received phonetic training.
That's I use the, I really meant, I didn't mean they have been taught it. They are able to produce vowels in isolation, is that correct?
Not really.
Because we have advanced students who are not able to do it. They're
actually, if you look at the results, right? I mean, even the imitation at pretest, they were not able to produce it, right? I mean, we could hear it and we could assess their F2s, and right. You see how they have improved it. So yeah, I mean, definitely not even repetition of words.
But so, I can see that in final position where you're highlighting it by the accentedness and the length, that would help them. But in unstressed situations, if you are using the embodiment, it seems to me that it might also throw the stress off.
Yeah, actually, I mean, what happens with the materials, that they have like everything, right? They have like prominent positions, non-prominent positions, so that's like a pack. And this is a research question, right? Whether it was the prominent effect that could have bootstrapped more here, right? But we don't have the database to do this, because everything was together, right? And that was, more like thought of like phonetic training that could be actually done in the classroom, right? Not so much to test these hypotheses, but this is a plausible question, right?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so we'll try and ask just one more question if Crizio wants to unmute and ask his question.
I can. I'm in the car. I don't know whether you can hear me well. The question is right there. It's a direct question. All right. Thank you for this great talk. This was very, very nice. I wanted to ask you, maybe you talked about it and I missed it, whether you have any insights about the contribution of gesture or music training at advanced levels of second language learning.
Advanced levels, yeah. I guess, well, yeah, thanks for the question. Yeah, I mean, we tended to first, like some years ago when we were starting with this, we were thinking, well, it's nice that they don't know anything, because then we have a stage 1, which is very controlled, right? But now we really like to go into the actual classroom and say, okay, right? I mean, that we want to work with learners, right, at different stages. So that's what we do. That's what we do. And generally in our university, we have like intermediate level students. And we used to take them because of this, right? Because they are here, right? I mean, and normally they are intermediate level, even when they get out of the university. So it's so that's our range. And also because many times we think, well, we're going to see a larger gain, right? So yeah, the thing is that presumably, since our students do not get phonetic training, even for advanced students of, say, for example, English or French, you can get this pronunciation, a lot of pronunciation problems anyway, right? So, yeah, I mean, we would end up like thinking about our experiments doing like similar things. Now, if the question is, well, we could try to get these very advanced students, so show our hypothesis, if we wanted to target those, right, would be that indeed, right? I mean, if you, in the same way you're learning from one stage to and get better with relatively short trainings, we can do that also with very more advanced levels, right? So it's like I don't think that it would be, changing our hypothesis, even though for many reasons we normally target the intermediate level students. Yeah. I don't know if you were asking Austin for a specific reason or.
Well, I think it's a selfish reason. I'm a second language learner. I live in a second language world, so I'm curious about what that does for second language acquisition, but also because I'm more interested in advanced stages of second language learning, like reaching near native proficiency and that kind of thing. And yeah, you addressed exactly the kind of thing that might be a concern there, how to establish a baseline. Thank you.
Thanks
Great talk, by the way.
Thanks.
Nice meeting you.
Thank you. Nice meeting you too.
Okay, I feel like the very boring music now that's being played at the in the nightclub to kick out people, but we have to stop. So thank you. This was really a wonderful talk. I'm pretty sure we could go for a long time. Thank you so much. Thank you for coming. Thank you for coming on Friday midnight here. Well, yes, thank you everybody for facilitating and organizing the talk. We have all lots to think about. Have a nice weekend, everybody, and thank you.
Yes, thanks a lot. And if you can send me the questions in the chat, if possible, I'm trying to copy them or, yeah, I mean, so yeah, thanks a lot for having me. That was amazing. Thanks a lot.
I just saved the chat. I'll send it to you.
Thanks
Here,
a lot.
I unmuted so you can hear applause from the audience.
Oh,
Thanks to you guys. Bye.
thank
Thanks a
you.
lot.
Bye.